Print Fail Friday, episode 5. This one's a little resin heavy, but that's all right. Let's get into it. Hey, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about some failures. We've got some resin failures that I had coming soon. So make sure you guys stick to the end of the video to see those. We're gonna get right into it with an FDM print from the TV show Squid Game, available on Netflix. What you're seeing is the Front Man mask, but I figured it'd be kind of cool to show off our employee mask made by Wexter. His Patreon will be linked in the description. We did a time lapse of it, so you guys can take a look. But it says perfect print minus that one layer line. Has this happened to anyone else? I mean, the answer is yes, it's happened to tons of people. But your problem? Very simple. Slightly clogged extruder. That's all. You had a little bit of a clog in your extruder. Maybe there was some gunk in your filament. Maybe some dust got in there and clogged it up. No big deal. Nice and simple thing to fix. It looks like it totally solved itself, so I wouldn't even worry about it. With something like this, you might be post-processing it anyways, and if you're not, well, great time to learn. A little bit of filler primer, she'll go right away, and if it still persists, you can use body filler, like Bondo, and you can get it in a little tube and smear it on. That way you can then sand it down. Or Uncle Jesse actually showed this off. We'll card to his video so you can take a look at it. But you can use resin mixed with baby powder or cornstarch. It doesn't really matter. And that turns into a bit of a fine paste that you're then able to put into your part, cure it with UV light, and then go ahead and immediately start sanding. But don't forget, resin is toxic, so please, 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 please be careful. Yeah, simple one. This is the easiest one. Let's move on. Help with bottom radius. First off, cool to print a skeleton Lego minifig, but in big size. It is that time of the year. It's a little spooky around here. We've got some rough overhangs here, and thankfully, we got another high-res photo. We have some curling, and curling is normally due to a lack of good cooling. Poor cooling can be found when you don't have enough airflow around all areas of the printer. Something that I'd like to point out is that it looks pretty good from about here to here, right? There's nowhere near as much issue as there is when you go a little bit further on either side. That leads me to believe that they're using potentially Creality style hot end with a blower that is only blowing on one side. There are a few ways that you can fix this. The first one, slow down the printer. Right? If you slow down the printer, it's going to have more time to cool that layer and keep it from curling. Number 2, better supports. Particularly, we really enjoy the supports generated in Prusa Slicer 2.4, the latest alpha, which is now alpha 2. We did a video on alpha 1. We'll card to it there so you guys can see it. But I look at this and say, this could be a support thing too. The snug supports available in Prusa Slicer 2.4, you can get them a lot closer than you can get traditional supports, and I believe that might solve some of this problem. But looking at your temperatures, looking at your cooling, all of that is a great scenario. A couple of commenters were saying to mess with your layer height, and I think that that's something to mention here. Thinner layers would technically work because you have less cross-sectional area hanging out in the wind all the time, and that means you have less real overhang that the printer is dealing with. If they're not willing to sand, prime, and paint it, I don't think a thicker nozzle works here. You could cut it, but again, if you're not willing to sand, prime, or paint it, it doesn't work here either. And if they were willing to sand, prime, or paint it, they would have already done that. So my opinion here, look at getting better cooling. If you have a printer where the fan is only on one side, make sure that you either put a better fan shroud on it. So if it's like an Ender 3, look at like a Petsfang or something like that. That's a much better fan shroud, although I might be out of the loop on what's good for Ender 3s. Let me know down in the comments if I've, potentially screwed that one up. But yeah, better cooling, more cooling, lower temps, lower layer heights, all of those are ways to kind of work at chipping away at this problem. There is no one definitive answer, but I think that definitely helps. We've got a fan submission. This one comes courtesy of a good friend of ours who had a bit of a rough layer shift on their Prusa Mini. This one, I even got the Zip AMF for because I didn't know what was going on here. because they tell me they use bone stock settings, so there really shouldn't be all that much of an issue. But looking at it, I see a telltale sign. Right here, right here, right there, and a couple of other places where the printer is needing to do flat layers, and there's nothing for it to build on. And that's a shame, because that'll add curling to it and cause buildup that when you go ahead and move the printer, will cause it to collide with the print itself. It's actually why we recommend a fair bit extra Z-hop than what Prusa does stock. We normally do at least 0.8 millimeters, but realistically, you can go up to 1 or even 2. Yes, it does add print time, and if you are doing really tall prints, it does reduce the amount of Z height that you can get. However, I think it's worth those trade-offs sometimes to ensure that you don't run into your own dang print. This is printed at 0.15 millimeter layers, but we can see that I don't know if maybe the bottom layer is not supported right there, or if maybe that first layer is not all that clean, but there are some other issues. Now, looking at this, I am curious because I can't tell right off the hop, because we are definitely over extruding quite a bit, but I don't know if this is rectilinear or if it is grid, where rectilinear is one layer this way, the other layer this way, where grid does both of them every single layer. If it is rectilinear, the over extrusion would make sense, but I'm not sure that it is. We are seeing some thoughts of over extrusion, so I don't know what's going on. This is Polyterra, which in my opinion is a little more picky than some of the other filaments that we've tried, but I do think it's worth the effort itself. We can see some gunk that it's grabbed there. This is a bummer, of course, it's a few hours in. Thankfully, this wasn't running overnight where they came into a print that is shifted, because a lot of times it will still continue to print, just shifted, and that's not sellable, and of course, it's a waste of money. But what isn't a waste of money is making sure that you leave a like and get subscribed, because we love doing print fails, and we want to help you have less of them. This one's tough, though. I've been there. This is a bit of a demon to work with, because if you don't see it happen, you won't really know unless you can see burn marks. But I do believe, especially right there, there's nothing under this. It's printing in free air, and that means that you won't have a great top surface. Now, they got lucky. Clearly, there's some luck involved there. I think that might have been part of our culprit. This print comes via Austin from our Discord. Austin is a patron. Thanks for being super awesome, Austin. And this is a paint bucket from Prusa Printers. He's having some issues with what appear to be retractions. We have a very obvious Z-seam and some little tiny blobs. And these are all from retraction. The big Z-seam is kind of that instant, hey, I've got a problem with retraction. Now, we've worked with Austin to get this one solved. It's not too difficult to solve. It just requires kind of fiddling with that retraction to get it perfect. We can definitely see this is your Z-seam right here, and that all these little dots are where the machine is doing other retractions and movements. From what I can tell, it appears that it is doing all of the retraction before the wipe, and there's not enough material to do that wipe and make it nice and clean. So it happens, there's not much you can do, but I have faith that we will get this one tuned up pretty well. And if you are having print fails, you can come join us on our Discord by becoming a member on our Patreon, patreon.com/3D Musketeers. This next one is both a fail and a learning lesson, just like my segue. Our sponsor, 3D Musketeers. This is actually a client print, or should have been a client print, and it's because they are trying to get their ideas out of their head and into their hands with full art-to-part rapid prototyping. This individual is actually a jeweler, and we are doing custom jewelry for them in a brand new casting resin that we are trying out from Soraya Tech. Sometimes these things are a little bit tougher than usual, and oh yeah, by the way, we're hiring. YouTube at 3dmusketeers.com. Send us a resume, everything from CAD to marketing to video editing to sales. If you think you got what it takes to join the 3DM team, hit us up. We'd love to talk to you. This is my print failure. This is actually on an original Elegoo Mars. We still have 4 of them that aren't broken. I bought 7 or 8 of them back when the Elegoo Mars was brand new, because it made more sense to us to have multiple printers, each with their own different color or material, than it did to buy like one Prusa SL1. Now that I've worked on the SL1 and hopefully will be working on an SL1S soon, probably should have gotten the Prusa, but you know, it is what it is. This is one of our few Elegoo Marses that are still in good shape that don't need new screens. The staff get the broken screen Marses because I don't want to fix them, and they can get a free printer for like a $50 screen. But we've got ourselves a bit of a problem here. These are rings, and actually, here is what those rings should have looked like. This is the actual Lychee Slicer file that we made for the client. And of course, Lychee Slicer is one of our favorite resin slicers. I'll card to the video right there so you can take a look at my first look at Lychee Slicer. We wanted to try out their brand new support features and kind of dealing with different rafts and attempting to remove some of those suction forces while keeping these prints sturdy, because casting resin, especially the Soraya casting resin, links in the description by the way, are a little bit tough to print with. They're either very watery, which is what the Soraya one is, or ones like Maker Juice Wax Labs is very viscous and actually has wax in it. It means you have to constantly keep it stirred or it's going to end up settling. Casting resin is, in my opinion, on the upper echelon of consumer grade resins to print in, so it took us a little bit to get it right. And I'll be the first to admit, I was pretty frustrated. This was not my first attempt. This was my best fail that we had for this. And so, like anybody, I went to the community and said, what the heck am I doing wrong here? And someone said, 1, you didn't print the Amerilabs Town, so I went ahead and did that. But 2, your settings are way wrong. We can take a look at these settings side by side, and I know it might be a little difficult to read, but this is how it was before, and this is where we're at now. And there are some pretty serious changes here, and a lot of it comes into the lifting speed. This was not something that Soraya had on their best practices previously, but because of what we found, it was actually added, which is pretty cool. This resin does not like vroom settings, V-R-O-O-O-M. I don't know, we might do a video on it. It's how to increase your resin 3D printer speeds without seriously degrading your part quality. We thought it would be fine for this. Spoiler alert, it is not. You actually have to run really, really low lift speeds, like 45 millimeters a second to get it to work. But that's not where our problem stopped. If you notice, the exposure time is 14. I actually turned it down to 13 for the print, and it ended up being way too low. When we look at our Amerilabs Toontown, we can see there are a lot of the pegs that are missing, the Space Needle is missing. There's a whole breakdown video that Atlas 3D did for this. We'll card to their video so you guys can go take a look at it. But suffice to say, my settings kind of sucked for this. And thankfully, with the help of the Atlas 3D Discord, we were able to get some really awesome resin prints. Like, check these things out. These are in Soraya casting resin. Beautiful detail on the rings there. And all of this, I believe, is due to really good settings from those guys to help us out. So I want to give a big shout out to the Atlas 3D Discord. Without you, I would probably be pounding my head against a wall still. But this is part of the learning process. Don't get me wrong, when this happened, I was really about ready just to give up, throw in the towel, and say, I'm done with this. Because this shit is really frustrating, especially as a business owner. A client wants their stuff done. I had successful prints with this stuff a couple of days prior, but they weren't this big. These were really small, flat parts. These rings have very small surface areas, which make them difficult to support. This learning process, along with asking the community, was what helped us stay here. And I'm glad, because sometimes you have to say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing and I need a little bit of help. Yes, this is an LCD Mars. This is not a mono screen Mars. I looked at replacing the FEP, but the FEP was basically brand new. I made sure the screen was still intact because a lot of these Mars printers are getting old and their screens are starting to fail. I looked to make sure that the plate was level. It was. I re-leveled it a couple of times. we still had that issue. I probably have 5 or 6 failures into this, and that was one of the only ones that I took photos of. But I'm happy to say that, you know, with a little bit of time and effort, we were able to get really, really pretty supports, and that printed really cleanly. I'm very happy about these, and the client will be too, because that's what it's all about. When you don't have the right answer, you ask. And that's why you can tweet at us, you can tag us on Instagram, you can email us, youtube@3dmusketeers.com, and that helps us help you. And if you are really having trouble with your printers and you need some extra help, email us directly and I'll be happy to set up like a 15 or 20 minute phone call with you or Zoom call where we can help you out. And hey, maybe if you're being especially awesome, we will include that call in the next Print Fail Friday, with the full length one obviously going directly to our patrons. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thankfully, this failure, not wet filament. Very glad to hear that. Although if you do want to see one where I give nothing but wrong answers, let me know, because I am kind of tired of seeing people say it's wet filament. And if you're wondering what wet filament looks like, we'll card to last week's episode where we actually had a wet filament problem. Anyways, stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one. PrintFailFriday. Hey, thanks so much for watching, and a big thank you to our patrons who are listed right next to me. Without your support, none of this would likely be all that possible. Right below me is the entire playlist for Print Fail Friday, and next to it is the playlist for printer maintenance, because proper maintenance goes a long way into keeping you from having failures. I want to know, do you get failures often? And if so, what are they? Let me know down in those comments. I'll see you all down there and in the next one. Take care.